Welcome to the Along the Gravel Road podcast, where we're changing the conversation around mental health. Today's guest is Meredith LaBorde, and she's going to share her journey with disordered eating and what that looked like for her growing up, and how she, when the problem started, and how it's just now, when she's gone to therapy and really got help for it, that she's able to identify all the things throughout her life that have sort of led here and have, sort of built this problem, and how now she can take the steps to change it and recognize when things are coming up for her that make it worse or that trigger her. And so we're going to really get into that, and it should be a really good conversation. One of the things she shared with me is that it can be a lonely journey, and that's what we want people to know, is that all of these journeys, that you're not alone in this. So I'm really excited to talk to her today and really grateful to her for sharing her story with us. Before we jump in, I do want to talk about an amazing production company that is producing this podcast, Ray Media Group. If you're looking for a company that can deliver an amazing product and an experience, then Ray Media Group is who you need to call. They specialize in weddings, podcasts, commercials, YouTube, business promotions, and it's really been great to work with a company who strives to create this experience for their clients. And so you're not just a number to them. They take the time to build these relationships. Trust me, I know from experience. We've been working together for a little bit now, and it's been amazing. And they put up with me, which is a great thing. So you can check out their website at raymediagroup.com. That's RHEA mediagroup.com, or give Ken a call at 225-772-7504. Now we're going to jump into it. Hello, Meredith.
Hi, Chelsea. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here. I was really glad when you reached out to talk about this topic, because just like you said, it's not something that we often talk about in like sort of, a more public space, and it can feel very isolating. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you're here to share this with our audience, because I know so many people can connect and relate to this. So I will let you take it from here and just share a little bit about your journey with us.
For starters, thank you for having me. I think you're doing great work with the You're Not Alone project and everything, because I do think, like you mentioned, any kind of mental illness is lonely. And I think there are times where you just think that no one else is going through anything, because it looks like from the outside everyone's happy and hunky-dory, and it's the opposite. And I think, we talked about how somehow our stories kind of overlapped of our hurt and our illnesses. So I think I'm happy to be here. I think that's great to have the conversation, and it's a great time to come on, because next month I'll make 2 years of recovery, of just healthy decisions and just giving up control. And that's something that I'll probably get into, because my eating disorder was never about fitting into clothes or looking a certain way. It all came down to control, and controlling what I ate, and controlling my body, and using my body as a source of control. So, and through work with therapy, I've had great therapists, especially the one I have right now. And she's done a lot of good things of just showing me how to look at things and asking me the right questions. And so when I was 14, I hate using the word traumatic, because I feel like it kind of gets thrown around, but something very bizarre and just very life-altering happened to me and my family at a place of worship. And it was so, again, it was chaotic. This place was like my family was involved, and it directly affected my older sibling. And to see her hurt, and to see how my family is adapting. My mom was also handling her mom being sick. My dad helped start this church. Everyone was just really connected to it. And something bizarre happened. And, I was 14, and I just kind of, it's like that. I wasn't a girl, not yet a woman kind of situation where, you're coming of age, and you just see these things that you were taught to count on, and to just find peace in, just explode. And what I internally started doing was just not eating or not eating healthy. And I think at that time you're 14, and you just think my exposure to eating disorders were either you're anorexic or you're bulimic. So you either don't eat at all, or you throw up your food. Those were the knowledge. That's as far as my knowledge went. And I was eating. I just wasn't eating enough, because I was using my body I was suppressing all of my needs and all of my wants, because I didn't want to give anyone anything to worry about, because there were bigger problems at stake. And I don't blame my family. I don't blame my parents for anything, because honestly, there is not a manual to go through what we went through as a family. And I think that honestly made us closer to this day. So I don't blame anyone for what happened. However, I was just suppressing my eating. I was just using control because it just felt like I couldn't grasp anything around me. Everything was changing. Things that I thought I could count on, I couldn't. And that's a young age. You're in high school and you just kind of think like you just didn't care about the other problems, like who likes you and who doesn't. Like you're just like, no, I just want to make sure that my family is okay. And just kind of, but you looking back on it, like a 14-year-old should have to care about who likes her and who doesn't. So it's almost like I wouldn't go to the extremes and say I was like robbed of my adolescence, but I do think I had to grow up in a weird sense quicker than other people around me. So I started just suppressing my appetite and just kind of using my body as a source of control. And it really didn't click until I went to therapy. And I talk about how throughout my life, when things feel out of control, that's when things arise. And my therapist had to ask, like, when was the first time you ever experienced loss of control? And it went back to 14, and it brought me back to a memory that we were visiting my grandmother in the hospital, and my dad and my grandfather and I went to dinner. And we went to dinner, and and I went to the bathroom after, and I never normally do that. It was just bizarre. And later that evening, my mom came to me and said that my dad was alarmed that I went to the restroom after because I had been losing weight. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, like, because just like I said, my only knowledge of an eating disorder was anorexia or bulimia, and I wasn't throwing up then. And I was eating. So I was like, no, I don't have one. I'm fine. Like, and again, don't worry about me. Like, I'm good. We have bigger things to worry about. So, and throughout my life, it just has come things with, just, I had a really bad breakup in college. And I just remember feeling loss of control because it came out of nowhere. So I took to partying, and I took to not treating my body correctly. And then whether it was abusing it or just not treating it well. And then like we kind of talked about this when we were doing our pre-chat, that symptoms come like, it's like in a horror movie when it's like the fog and it's like, oh, something's coming. Like, so symptoms come because late in 2015, this is kind of like where you've just grown to know yourself and just to kind of look for symptoms. I was losing my job because I was working in politics and the governor was switching at the time. I was losing my roommate because she was getting married. I was losing my apartment because I didn't have a roommate anymore. Yeah. So it was all these loss of like, oh God, oh God, oh God, I don't know what to do. Things that I was holding on to so tightly, I'm having to let go, and I don't know what to do. And I just remember I was dating this guy at the time, and I called him and I was like, I didn't eat today. And like that to me was a big step of vulnerability, because it also was asking for accountability. It was like, hey, this is me. Like, I'm seeing the signs, and you think it goes away. You think it went away, and it didn't go away. And I remember he just goes, it's fine, you'll eat tomorrow. And so then you feel alone, because you're like, this is the only way I know how to tell someone, like, hey, something's going on. And it was just quickly dismissed by someone who was supposed to be this person who cared about me and whatnot. And so you just isolate. And I just remember I was in weddings at that time. So you're just fixated on your body because you have to fit into a bridesmaid's dress, and you have to fit. And then you're also like, you're about to lose your job. So you have to hold on to money because you're like, oh, I'm just going to skip dinner tonight and I'm just going to eat a big breakfast tomorrow. Like, you kind of, all the things of control of what you just try to do. So, and I think, at that time, that I wanted to be in one field. I wanted to do this one thing with my life, and God just did not have that plan for me. And I was very stubborn. And so basically for the past 5 years of fundraising, I just was never satisfied. And I really feel like that was the 5 years that I felt a loss of control. So I was abusing my body, whether by not eating or just hurting my body. And I don't want to say anything that triggers anyone. So I'm just going to say I hurt my body. And I did that for 5 years, and it was lonely. And I think we kind of talk about how, and it's funny because I was telling people I had it. Eventually I worked with a therapist and I went to her and we did some work, and she made me take this test about like the symptoms and like what I do. And I just remember being like, whatever, like, yes, no, like whatever. And at the end it was, you have an eating disorder. And I remember I think about you because you talk about your story about how it didn't click until you had it in writing. And mine was when I took this test, it was like, oh. And like, cause you think you spend all this time that you're like, oh, it's all in my head. It's like, it's not really a big deal. Like, cause again, I'm eating, but not eating enough. And you just think it's all about control, and you just think that I think there's the victim like you're like, it's not a big deal. You're just being dramatic. And then when she put that in front of me, it was like, oh, like this is a big deal. So I've been working with it, but again, I've just been going to therapy. I've been doing the work, and just so I'm happy to say that next month I'm 2 years clean.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So you were talking about in 2015 that moment you were starting to realize, obviously, that you were experiencing all these things that you knew were going to lead up to some getting back into unhealthy habits. At that time, had you gone to therapy and started that process, or was it not until later?
I went to therapy after I started my fundraising job, because I remember, it's like a weird thing because you just start to know your body and you're like, I probably need to seek help. Like I could recognize, like, I didn't have energy and but I would work out because it would always be about like, I had at one point, I guess you could kind of, because I did all the research, like it was anorexia nervosa, where you just counted everything, where it was like, okay, well, I didn't move today, so I'm only going to have 100, like, I'm not going to eat a lot because I just stayed in bed. Yeah. And it was like, that's not normal. And it took a therapist to be like, hey, babies don't do anything, but we still feed them. They still need nutrients. Like, you need nutrients. So it was just kind of like, I recognized it and I had to go to a therapist. I saw one. I've been through like 4 and some of them are good. Some of them weren't best. I told you about the one who encouraged throwing up after Thanksgiving dinner because people do it all the time. And that's not healthy. So if you're listening to this, that's not healthy. And I really hope she didn't tell a lot of people that, especially people who have a history of hurting their bodies. But it took me a while to find a good therapist, and probably until 2018, 2019 is when I found a good one. But yeah, so to answer your question.
Yeah, and I think even just knowing that a trained therapist said that to you, which obviously should never have happened. And I'm sorry that they said that to you. And I also hope that they're not saying that to you. But that really speaks to the fact that it is something that not a ton of people understand, and probably don't have the training. Because I know, like, for me, it's not like something that it's not one of the issues that you talk about in school.
Yeah, you don't talk about it. And then because I knew I needed to get help, like even just looking for resources in Baton Rouge, there are none. And you just have to be like, hope this girl can help me, click. And you go and you're like, it's kind of like dating. You're just like, okay, we're not a match. So you have to go find the other one. And then just making sure that you find the right fit. And I've been really lucky because I had a really good one. And she got pregnant, so she referred me to who I see now. And she's done amazing work. And I've talked to you, like she's, I do want to say, and I don't know if this is the part of the podcast to say it, that, for a long time, I just thought I was taking care of it and I thought I was doing it. And I went to therapy and I thought therapy was going to fix all my problems. And I think it's a weird journey of therapy because you go and you let it all out and you're just kind of like, okay, great, now you have the tools, like, fix me. And therapy is not that. Therapy is, okay, like, how can we work together to work through what you're going through? So I think, and I talk about how, I guess it was 2018 it was 2018 because unfortunately something else happened that year that really spiked the eating disorder as well. And I just kind of wasn't acting I was kind of acting reckless. And, you just, because you're losing control and you don't know how to gain control, and it just becomes a spiral, and it's lonely. And, but I just knew, but I told people I had one. So I thought like I was doing the work. I was being honest and I was being vulnerable and I was telling people, but I wasn't really like, it wasn't until like, you do that for so long and you're like, why don't I feel better? Why am I not seeing result? Like, why do I just keep going back to therapy and it's like the same session over and over? And then, I think with my own growth, I just kind of, I went to another therapist and I just said like, so what do I need to do? Like I couldn't take I couldn't put the responsibility on my therapist anymore to do the work for me. It was like, hey, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired. And I think it took to ask, hey, I'm so glad my therapist made me look at my life and say, hey, when's the first time you ever felt like you were losing control? And I was like, oh, when I was 14 and this church did X, Y, and Z to my family. And it was like, and then that memory came back and it was like, oh, I think I've been doing this for a long time and I didn't know it. So it was like, but me asking the questions of like, hey, I want to get down to this. I want to know what I need to do. And, she's done things. And I told you like there was something that happened in my life and I kind of treat it as like, let's just get it over with. And that phrase has come up in other areas of my life where she was like, when's the last time you said that? And I was like, oh, I hadn't handled that. So really kind of going to the therapist and doing the work of, just doing the work. I couldn't rely on them to be my savior. It was like, hey, you have to take some responsibility. It's just kind of like dating when you're just dating all the wrong people, probably because you're hurt and you're just looking for other people to just, because you're bored and you're hurt and you just need distractions because you're losing control. But you have to look at that common denominator and it's like, it's always you. I'm not saying that they were great. They were just, but I wasn't great either. And it was like, hey, let's go do some work on you. So having to ask those hard questions with your therapist to say, why do I keep doing this? Like what's going on, and getting down to the core of it I feel like in the last 2 years, because I haven't hurt myself or like, and I've reframed how I look at eating and healthy and exercise and all that. I'm careful about what I consume, like whether it's like on Instagram, I don't follow the Kardashians. I don't follow people who promote unhealthy lifestyles or like unreachable, like unattainable things. I just can't. And I think it's great I think it's great that they're putting their art out there. I just can't do it. And I think, I exercise now and I go where I have to like fuel my body and give my body like all the nutrients, or else I'm going to pass out and I don't want to do that. So just kind of having to work with my therapist of just saying to be self-aware and to do the practices and to want to really not just put a Band-Aid on things, but to actually heal the scars.
Yeah. And so you talk about this idea of control, but it wasn't until all your life going through this, you never knew that that's what you were looking for until you were able to look back and then really dive in and see like, oh, this wasn't about, what it actually was. This was about control. And we talked about this at a certain point, this thing that you thought you had control over was now controlling you. And that's when we can't do this anymore.
Because it like affected my work, and it was affecting my I'm sorry to anyone who knew me at that time of my life, because I probably wasn't great to be around. Like it was just, or like you're masking. So you just almost feel like you were lying to people for a good part of your life. Like I think about, and I hope it's okay to talk about, like you and I didn't talk for a while, but I also think because looking at your growth and knowing my growth, we were just hurting and we didn't know how to talk to each other about it. Cause it was like, because again, you feel alone and you feel, and I wasn't going to talk about it, but I'm going to, like, you feel unlovable. Yeah. Like you feel damaged and you feel like, so I think both of us, like you search for these people to comfort you, and they are terrible people. If you look at our dating records, and it's like, we just you feel unlovable. You feel like no one's, like half the time you're like, taking care of me is exhausting. Like, how could I expect someone else to take care of me? Because they're not going to want someone who can't even grocery shop like a normal person or normal, like, you just realize all these things about how this sickness does affect you that no one else. Like I talked about how one time it was during the pandemic, and my coworker and I went to the grocery store at lunch because we didn't know what the day was going to bring. And she just could effortlessly put things in her cart. And it's something that like you don't think, because I live alone. I do a lot of things alone. So doing things with other people is sometimes like, oh, that must be so nice to just grab like cereal, where I looked at cereal for probably 5 minutes to be like, what is going to be the one brand that doesn't make me like hate myself if I eat this at the wrong time? And again, it was control. And at that time I was not hurting myself or doing anything, but I was seeking control in other ways. So it was kind of like, for this big time period, I was suppressing. It was like a high. I kind of compare it to an addiction, because you just knew it was going to be a quick fix. So you just go and do it, and then you're like, okay, fine. And then you have to sit in the shame of like, you you shouldn't be doing this, but you don't know what else to do. So there was a time between 2019 to 2020 where I did go a whole year, and I just remember that year was really hard because it was the pandemic. I hated my job. I was doing all these things. And normally what I would do to release, I couldn't do anymore. So you have to sit in it, and you have to feel it, and you have to go through it. And it's hard when you especially know that there was a quick fix, and now you're like, but you don't go back there. Don't go back there. And it was like and talked about this in the blog post one time. It was, I went to Europe, and it was an up and down experience. And if you want to ask, I'll tell you about it another time. But I just remember sitting on the plane, and I just wanted to release so bad because I was so confused. I had no control. And I just remember saying, just get to August. If you get to August, you have something to work for. So that's kind of how I looked at goals. But because of that, I had to sit in a lot of uncomfortable situations in life, the pandemic and things like just, everyone lost control then. And I remember my therapist saying, the fact that you went through this and didn't relapse is something to be proud of. And I just remember being like, oh, you're right. She's like, all the things that you were feeling, it would have been so easy for you to go back to your old ways and do what I did. And I didn't. And I'm so proud of that time. But you're lonely, and it's just, you feel like, who would want me? And I'm going to say this, and I feel like this is a safe space, that I'm very spiritual. And I just kind of, the reason why I'm on a 2-year journey is because 2 years ago, I really did just say, God, I can't do this anymore. And I just don't, I want to do the work, and I want to do things. And it hasn't been easy, because we talked about how, because we didn't have that one thing, it came out like, again, last year, I lost my grandfather, and grief does crazy things to you. And I realized I was doing some behaviors, and it was like, wait, this is just that, but it's coming out in another way. Yeah. And it doesn't go away. Like, it doesn't, I think we talked about how it just must be so nice for people who don't have these problems. Cause it's like, what do you mean you just go to bed and your brain doesn't race? Like, what do you mean? Like,
what is that?
Yeah. It's like, oh, you could just go into the grocery store and put things in your bag and not have to worry about and again, I think, this is, again, my ADD brain, but I live alone. So everything I have in my house, I have to eat. And it's like, I don't want to have, I bake every Friday, and I bring them to my coworkers at Banana Republic, because I'm like, get them out of my house. I can't have them all here. But it's like, you do these things where you are alone, but you have to be careful, because it's like, it's only me who has to eat this. It's only me who has to. So that's why I bake gluten-free and dairy-free, because I know that's my form of control, to be like, well, at least you're going to eat all these. Like, if you eat all these, at least they're healthy, and you don't have to feel guilty. First of all, I hope there's a day where we can just eat things and not feel guilty because you ate gluten. I do have an allergy though, so it makes sense. But it's just kind of learning to teach my body, hey, food is fuel. Yeah. Food can be good for you. Food is fun for you. Food doesn't have to be this terrible thing. And, and I was also on medication from the time that I was 10 to 22, and it suppressed my appetite. And so I just feel like I was never I never saw a healthy way to live life. I mean, to eat with food, because I mean, my mom will tell you, I would just eat at 10 o'clock at night, and she was just happy I was eating.
Right.
You know, she was like, oh, she's eating, so that's great. I'm not going to tell her that she probably shouldn't eat at 10 o'clock at night. So it's just, you know, I never had structure really. And then I found structure, and I just only wanted structure. That when I didn't have structure, I just lost it. And I'm sorry, I'm just talking. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You're doing great. No, and like what I really grasp onto there and can connect with there is like this idea of sitting in the uncomfortableness.
Yes.
Because that's like what, and even in our last guest talked about, like the only way out of it is through.
Yes.
And you really do have to be able to get through those points in healing in order to come out the other side. And even there's not really another side. You know, you are always sort of going through this. And, you know, for me, it looks a little bit different with like the anxiety and the depression, but a lot of it is so intertwined. And so all these issues that we're all sort of experiencing, whether it's, you know, eating or addiction or depression, all of these things, like, at the end of the day, we are so like that's where we can come together on, because like we are all going through this, and we're just sitting through those uncomfortable moments and doing this like work to get us there. And it is so hard. It is so hard. And to say like, oh, one day at a time, like if I can get through this, and to even find ways that, knowing that ideally you will get to a place where you're not feeling this guilt, but what can I do now that's going to be a healthy way for me to have some of this control, but that still allows me to be healthy, and that still allows me to start accepting myself and to start accepting that I don't need to have this control. So like, where do you find yourself at now with like those coping strategies, or what are you doing when you're starting to recognize signs of like, oh, this is a moment of anxiety, I feel like I'm losing control? What are some of the steps that you're taking now?
So, had an anxiety attack the same week that I had an anxiety attack this year. And it was so funny because I went to a golf lesson, and I was going to Ireland. I was going to play golf there. So I was like, let me just squeeze one lesson in before I go. And I met my work goals. Like I'd been hustling for like 4 months, and I was just going. And all of a sudden it was just like, oh, I get to go breathe. And I hadn't been able to breathe for a while. And then I just remember I was stressed, and I was just trying to have control over things. And I just remember my golf instructor was like, you stressed out a little bit? And I was like, no. I'm like, no, I'm on vacation. Like, whatever. He's like, okay, well, like, you're not moving your body like you should be, and like, whatever. And he was like, you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And I remember like, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have a scheduled cry. Me and my friend have what we call scheduled cries. I was like, I'm going to have a scheduled cry tonight. Well, it didn't even make it to tonight, because as I was leaving my lesson, like walking to my car, I just cried, and it was anxiety. And like anxiety just does the things of just taking all of your fears and just telling them to you. Like, and again, I'm happy where I am with my life. But it's like, it was telling me, you're going to be alone forever, and you're never going to do this. You're going to have a terrible time in Ireland, just like you had a terrible time in London, and just like all these things. And normally I knew it was, and it's like a thing where you're like, God, we've come so far since we've had one of these. And it's just like, we just got to go through it. And you talk about how, you know, my therapist did teach me, like, you know, don't stay there. You just got to go through it. And I just remember crying, and I was driving to my parents' house, and I was just, I gave myself one Taylor Swift song to listen to. I'm not going to wallow. It's just, you have to get out, like, but don't suppress it. Like, feel the things, but also, and this is something that, you know, I'm spiritual, and it teaches you, like, those things are from like the enemy. Those lies and everything, they're from the enemy to try to distract you and to make you not see your worth, and to not know like who you are as a person, as a child of God. And like, and because I've taken time to grow my spiritual faith, and to grow like with my worth, and to recognize who God has created me to be, that has also helped with my anxiety, because it's like, when those thoughts come in, you're like, that's not real. Those, I follow this account, and they're called the Shrink Chicks, and they said, they have this video, and it's like, sometimes thoughts are just assholes who just want to ruin your day.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I had to be like, those are just asshole thoughts. They're not real. And just because they're thought doesn't mean they're facts. But also like recognizing what they are, but also letting them have, like acknowledging them. Cause I think, back in 14 years old, I was just suppressing things. I was just like, nope, that's not important right now. We're not going to deal with that right now. And so having to say, no, we have to feel it, but they don't live here. Those thoughts don't live here. You can let them pass through, but keep going and keep going. And I think, just having that self-awareness to say, because of course I come home and I'm just crying and my mom's like, what's going on? I'm like, I had an anxiety attack. I'm going to take a bubble bath later and I'm going to be fine. Like, I know exactly what I need to do to not suppress this, but also not live in it, and just kind of having my moment and recognizing it, giving it its time, but not living there. And I think, that we talked about how, like, just my therapist has given me, like, again, that just get it over with phrase, how if I find myself saying it, it's like, hey, what are you experiencing here? Like, what's going on? And then, we talked about how I watched the morning show recently on Apple TV, and something there resonated with something that happened in my life, and I thought I was over it and I was fine, but I knew my mood, I was like moody and just kind of, and it's like, hey, why are you feeling this way? Like, you're having a good day. Like, what's going on? But realizing, like, oh, you probably need to talk about that with your therapist, because that's not nothing. And so kind of just having that self-awareness and that take a step back and realizing, and also like apologize, like, or just taking accountability of just saying, like, I've had to say, like, sorry, I'm feeling a certain way because XYZ happened today and it made me think of this, but like, I'm apologize if I snapped at you, or like just kind of having to take your responsibility for it. So those are the kind of thing I mentioned. I will not go work out. I work out at Hot Works in a sauna, and I will say, you have not eaten today. You're not going. Like, I know you have your yoga class, but you're going to be working out in 127 degree weather, and you didn't eat today, so you're not going. Like, just having to discipline myself, even though I'm 32 years old, I have to be like, nope, you don't get to. You're like, if you go home and eat and do this and this, then you can go work out, but you're not doing that, because again, you could literally hurt yourself. And just kind of having that, realizing your worth. And I think that that's like something that if anyone's out there and they probably do feel worthless and they feel like they don't deserve good things, and just not listening to those lies anymore, and just knowing I do deserve good things, and I do deserve, like, I deserve to eat a cookie. And I know that sounds silly out loud, but those are times where I was like, no, you didn't move your, like, I can't use Fitbits. I can't do anything that like tells me about my action. Like, and it's crazy because as soon as I let all of that go, I feel like I'm the healthiest I've ever been. I love my body, which has been a long time. Like, it's so, I mean, I give credit to God, but like, as soon as I let go, it was like all these things became so much more simple, because it was like I was grasping onto the control to control it. Like you said, it eventually started controlling me. And then I just was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, that's so easy. Yeah.
So easy yet so hard. And so I think too, for so many of us, instead of taking that time to recognize when things are triggering for us, and when things come up, or when these thoughts come in, we're just like, we just keep going. We just keep pushing through and say, and push it aside and suppress it, because we've sort of been conditioned to think that we have to power through this, that we have to be okay, that we have to be strong, or whatever it is for, it looks different for everybody based on, like you said, all of these things you sort of are conditioned growing up. But like, to be able to now start to recognize when those thoughts happen, and to be able to connect them with these emotions, and to be able to sit with them and either accept them for what they are, or negate them and say, no, that's not true, that's false, is the only way to start getting down and digging deeper, and to say, like, these beliefs that I've been conditioned to believe about myself based on these experiences that I've had and the people around me and all these things that have happened to me that are beyond my control are not necessarily true. Yeah. And the big one, for you and I both, is this idea of worthlessness, or not being lovable, and like not being worthy of all these things. And it takes a lot to say, no, I am. Yes. I definitely am. And the more that comes out in ways that we're able to then find tools to cope with that, the less we're gonna end up where we were, where we're looking for other things outside of, the healthy things to deal with it. And I think I'm grateful. I think it's really special that we're able to share this now today, because we have come a long way. And I think where we were a couple years ago, we were really, just like you said, we thought we had figured it out. We were telling telling people what was going on in our lives. We had admitted that we were struggling. I have depression and anxiety, and I'm going to tell you about it. But we had not dealt with, we had not done the work yet. And that was very evident in our relationships and the things that were happening to us. And so I'm like, just to be able to share this experience with you and have these conversations with you and know that like how far we've come, like I'm proud of us.
I'm proud of us too. And I think I'll try to use this as a segue because, for a while, we talk about how it's lonely, and I really do want to preface that, or like emphasize that finding your tribe is very important with something like this. And I know it's hard. And I had someone who I thought was my tribe, and I conveyed to this person that I had relapsed, as you might say. And this person turned it all on me and said, like, why can't you see you like the way that we see you? And just kind of put more, like I already had shame. And this person just put more shame on me. And this person had been someone who I could call when I didn't know what to eat that night. Like it was someone, it kind of almost felt like betrayal. And so you kind of have to start from the ground, like, okay, like who are my people then? Because who can I convey this with? And this is something that like I want people, if they're experiencing this, like, you have to be vulnerable, but be smart about it at the same time. And just, some people might hurt you, but like last year I had that anxiety attack and my friend was planning her wedding, and I was like, I can't go home. I knew if I went home, something's going to happen. And she's like, come, we're doing stuff for the wedding. But like, and I was like, I don't care as long as I'm alone. And I mean, I'm not alone, and I am with people and I can do it. And I remember like that was the day I found out like my grandfather was really sick. So it was just, again, feeling all this like loss of control. And I just called her and I was like, and I didn't have to go into detail. I didn't have to do anything. She just has created a safe space for me to be like, hey, I just can't go home. I just need to come home, and she like come over to your house. And she's like, great. And like, there are people who, I think if there's people out there struggling, like just kind of, you almost need like a code word or do something that like, hey, like just surrounding yourself is such an important part. Cause I do feel like what hurt us was that we were hurt, and we also like didn't look for comfort. Like, cause again, we thought we didn't deserve it. And that's a whole thing. But it's also like being vulnerable and saying like, hey, like, it's so funny because I put it in a blog post 2018 because I thought I was doing the work. And someone reached out to me and she's like, hey, I battled with this in high school. Like, solidarity. I'm right there with you if you ever need anything. And this person has become a great friend of mine. And I remember like she's gotten married, she's like pregnant, and she's said things. And I'm like, hey, like, how are you accepting your body changing? Because that's something that's been a fear of mine. If I got pregnant, like, would I accept my body changing? Like, would I reject it or accept, like, and it's been so nice to have just that person who really does know what it feels like to be alone and just hurt. Like, and again, I don't know, we've never discussed like details of hers, but it's just nice to know that someone out there has experienced something similar to what you were experiencing, to say, hey, how did you get through this? Like, hey, how does your significant other support this? Because that's something that like, I know, you think it goes away, but I can just know if I started dating someone, like if I have a bad day, it's going to be like, oh God, like, how do I disclose this to them? And how do I say, because if you haven't been listening, a couple of people haven't been supportive of that. So it's just kind of asking her like, hey, how did you go about having that conversation with him and whatever, but just having a tribe. And I know you just, again, ignore the thoughts that make you feel like you're alone, and, well, let them exist, but don't believe them, and just kind of find the people that you feel like you can share that with, who will side you. I mean, you've created a safe space where whenever you posted, hey, if you want to come and talk, like, I knew that would be a safe space to come and talk about this journey, because it's been a wild one, but I do feel like it needed to be shared because
You too. And I'm so glad you are sharing this. A lot of what I really wanted to do moving forward with this podcast is share more about the stuff that we don't necessarily talk about, because who knows how to share that with a person you care about, and so you being able to do this in this space is so powerful. And imagine like what that's going to do for somebody who hasn't been able to say it out loud or even accept within themselves that they have a problem that they're struggling with, because that's the first part of it, is even admitting it to yourself. And so if we're able to get to a space where we can share these things with other people, then I think that's going to make us see this community that we have around us of people that are there to support, even if we're not necessarily dealing with the exact same thing. Because this is a topic that is so that we don't necessarily understand a lot about, and even I know like therapists and things don't necessarily, because it can be different. It looks so different for everybody.
It's such a gray area.
Yeah.
Illness, because there's orthorexia, there's like, it's just a whole, like if you go down the rabbit hole, it's a lot, and you're just like, well, do I have this or do I have that, or do you, like, that's how I felt, because I only knew of 2, and I was like, I'm not
overwhelming. And then you're already overwhelmed by this problem. So I can't, and that's why I was like, we have to talk about this, and we might not get it right. Like, I don't know exactly, I don't know exactly what what the best treatment is, but I think that's because it looks different for everybody. And I'm so glad that you were able to get the help that you need. And I'm really, I'm excited to see you on this recovery journey. I love it. I love this for you. I can see, see how all this work is impacting you and affecting you. And I'm glad you're able to share this with us today. So as we wrap up in like the last 5 minutes, what is one thing that you would want people to take away from your story today?
Oh gosh.
You gave us a lot of good stuff already.
But it's not your fault.
Yep.
Not to pull a good Will Hunting quote, but, I think, there's some things that happen that are out of your control, but that has nothing to do with your worth, and has nothing to do with, like, sometimes like bad things just happen to good people, and it has nothing to do if you are a bad person or if you were a good person. It doesn't have anything to do with that. And I just think it's important that you move on and not like forget about it, but work through it and pull through it and just see to the other side, because there's so much waiting on the other side. So again, my spirituality plays a big play. And I just think, and I'm not going to be one of these people to say you should believe in X, Y, and Z. I think you need to find your belief system that helps you wake up in the morning and get your day started, because that's something that has done miracles. Honestly, just to see, I compare myself to 2 years ago, and God has done crazy, amazing things in me and in other people that I'm so honored to do. But I wouldn't have, if I didn't just pull through, I think I wouldn't have seen it. So that's my one thing.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so interesting as we have these conversations, that's really been the connecting factor. That's what people keep coming back to. Is this idea it's not your fault, it's your worth, that there's nothing wrong with you, you don't need to be fixed. We're just dealing with all these things the best way we possibly can. And at the end of the day, we're running into these things that we can't handle anymore. And that's when we need to reach out and ask for support. And that's totally okay too. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
And thank you all for listening. We'll be back on the next episode.